Hi, I'm Michael Smith for Nevada Trails. Tonight I have a very special show. I have Matt Stein, the author of When Technology Fails. He's back with us again to, we kind of went a little bit fast the last time, and Matt is his background is he's an MIT graduate, and that's the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He majored in mechanical engineering. So
that's correct.
That's not too bad. And then the book we talked about, When Technology Fails, is a bestseller, and it's a comprehensive manual on sustainable living skills, survival, and disaster preparations. In the last show, we talked about a lot of the disaster stuff, and this show we're going to do more on the positive, what you can do show. And but he's been around. He's been on Fox News, Lionel, Coast to Coast AM, which is a show I listen to every night, and Tom Hartman Show. And this is another area I really liked. My girlfriend is legally blind, and you are an instructor for blind skiers.
That's right. I teach them skiing, and I also teach instructors other guides, people who want to assist blind skiers. I also help train them so that they can become guides for blind skiers cross country.
When we were driving from Citrus Heights to your area in Truckee, she passed, I think it was Boreal.
That's correct.
She said that's the last time she had any training for blind skiing when she first moved here like 20 years ago.
Right.
And we talked about doing skiing again, but this sounds like we could do some skiing, and you could probably tell us where to go to do it, because she has about 1/16 of one eye, and she skis or sees on shadows.
Right.
So I think you'd have to be a special person to be able to teach her not to get hurt.
Well, that's called a partial. There's high partials and low partials, people who are blind and legally blind, and some of them can barely see anything, and some of them can see a fair amount, but not enough to drive a car. And the program I work with, Sierra Regional Ski for Light, takes people cross-country skiing. And the cool thing about cross-country skiing is the machines set a track in the snow. So a lot of blind people have a tremendous amount of feeling of freedom because their skis are guided by these tracks in the snow, and they can get exercise, and they don't have to, and they can feel this freedom of motion and movement that they don't normally have in their life.
Yeah, so I thought that makes you a very special person to be giving your time to people that really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I think I get a lot more out of it than the people I'm guiding do. It's tremendous. It's one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life. And I've been doing it for 25 years now. Hard to believe.
Well,
Makes me seem old. You know?
Well, when I told her about it, she says, let's try to go skiing again.
Okay.
Because we're at that stage now where you either do it or it's over.
Right.
So anyways, let's get back with the topic of tonight's show is sustainability, and we hit it pretty hard on what happens with peak oil and deforestation and losing our food and population growth. And this show is to be more or less what we can do about it.
Okay. Well, on the large scale, there's a number of things. On the personal level, anything you can do, reduce, reuse, recycle, anything you can do to improve your own impact and improve your awareness is a positive step in the right direction. But as far as actually saving the world and preventing collapse, it's going to take major changes in a large scale. And so I've got 10 tips for making shift happen. And that shift is shifting our course from collapse to sustainability. So the very first part of that shift happening is changing the tax structure. Because unless we make it financial suicide for companies that are doing business in the old way, that's consuming and polluting the planet and heading us towards that brick wall of collapse, we must make it financial suicide for those, so we must be taxing them. So that currently what happens is a company can be messing up the environment totally and really ruining the planet and not pay a penny for that. So they should be taxed so that anything that's consuming and polluting the planet is penalized, and that the monies from that goes to funding those things which are doing business in the right way, that are preserving the planet. So in the past it was kind of the other way around, where companies were rewarded for lack of concern for the planet. They were rewarded with higher profit margins, and we've got to turn that around or the planet will be gone.
Didn't you mention a country in South America, was it Brazil, that reduced its use of oil, or is it just by doing some dramatic steps to their culture?
Oh, Brazil
one of them?
has turned it around tremendously. They use biofuels, and
Yeah.
the biofuels, they use sugarcane, and they make alcohol, and there's something called an energy return on energy invested. So in Brazil, for instance, they have about a 9-to-1 energy return on energy invested, which means if they use an equivalent of a barrel of oil, in their process, they'll get 9 barrels of alcohol, equivalent to that oil back. So they put out 1 and they get 9 back. And then they take the waste product and they burn that and generate electricity out of that, the bagasse, the waste from the sugarcane fields. Now in America, when we make biofuels out of corn, we get about a 1-to-1 energy return, or maybe a 1.3, which means that we take a barrel equivalent of oil and burn it up in the process, and then we get a barrel of equivalent of oil back, and it's like you've gone through all of that and you've essentially done nothing for the environment. So Brazil's an example of doing biofuels in the right way, and we're an example of doing it in the wrong way.
Well, that's actually why I liked your book so much. You had a lot of examples like that. Just, you know, what's going on for other people.
Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need to put America back to work rebuilding our homes and our cities. See, in the next 10 years, for a fraction of what we've just spent in the bailout on Wall Street, which we didn't get anything tangible for, we could have put that money and we could have put carpenters and contractors and plumbers and electricians back to work in this country, rebuilding our buildings for energy efficiency and for actual energy production. So in other words, we could use low interest loans and incentives to put everyone back to work and generate lots of jobs. And what we'd be doing is getting ourselves off the oil habit. We could turn every building in America into an energy producer instead of an energy consumer. And we could do that by putting America back to work. The other thing we could do is we can restructure our cities for mass transit to make them, I know it's not what we want, but to make them less friendly for the individual automobile and more friendly for mass transit. There's countries like Curitiba in Brazil where they have arteries through the city and they have bus lanes, and so most of the people there use mass transit because it's easy and it's convenient and it works better than individual cars in crowded cities. Now in America, we've kind of built around the car. We've done the opposite thing, and that was fine when we had a country that had tons of oil like 50 years ago, but now that we're a country running short on oil and running short on resources, it's time to change that around. Now we can rebuild our waterways and our railways and our mass transit. You know, when oil jumps up to $10 or $20 a barrel because the world just can't keep up with production, how are we going to make our business work in this country if we have not put the infrastructure in place beforehand so that we can cope with that? Then we're going to be screwed. We're going to have, it'll be, you know, the worst depression you can imagine, far worse than we're in right now if we don't plan ahead. Now we also need to rebuild our industries. So there needs to be domestic financial incentives. For instance, we can revitalize all of our industrial processes for maximum efficiency and minimum pollution, but unless there's a financial incentive for doing it, it isn't going to happen. And in order to avoid collapse, we must rebuild our industries. Now we can also share sustainable and renewable technologies with the third world. That's part of rebuilding the industry. One of the things we've done in the last few years is we've taken our worst polluting factories in America and Germany, and we've dismantled them and shipped them for a fire sale across the sea to China. And so in China, they're polluting there. Well, it's still ruining the climate of the planet, even if it's over in China and not in our backyard. So what we need to start doing is rebuilding our industries and helping the rest of the world rebuild them for maximum cleanliness, maximum and minimum environmental impact.
Well, as far as pollution, isn't a lot of our pollution hitting like upper Europe? Isn't our stuff going overseas someplace?
Well, we're getting a lot of pollution from China.
I heard that, yeah.
A lot of the smog in LA and in the west coast of the United States is coming all the way from China. And certainly in Europe, there's a lot of pollution. You know, they've currently had that dike that blew in one of the East European countries.
Yeah, I just heard that some of our stuff is really affecting the environment in Europe. I don't know where I heard that.
Well, I'd say the European stuff is probably affecting it more in Europe. But it does float around the world. I mean, we're getting China stuff. West Coast power plants, you know, blow to the east and cause acid rain in the east, and then it goes over the ocean and rains in the ocean. It's changing the acidification of the ocean. That's killing coral reefs. It's destroying the bottom of the food chain, the planktons. There's a Royal Canadian study that just showed that 73% of the world's zooplankton have disappeared between 1950 and today, and half of that's happened in the last 20 years.
Well, that's really scary stuff.
It is scary.
I used to scuba dive, and I couldn't imagine them being all dead now. It'd really be ugly.
So we also need to fund and support renewable energy. That there's only way our world is going to continue at anywhere, above the Stone Age level is if we develop the technologies now while oil is still happening to get off the oil habit. In other words, the only way to sustainably use oil is to take part of that oil to make the energy and to make the products you need to get off of oil, so that when the oil is gone, you have something to replace it with. And we're not doing that at the speed we need to in order to survive. We need to do this at a warp factor right now. Eliminate population growth. We talked about that in the last show. We must reduce the population growth to the point where it levels off and then starts to drop. If we don't do it ourselves, nature will do it for us. And when nature does it, it means starvation and plague and collapse, and that's not the future that I want to see. Now, we have to share the wealth and knowledge. The wealth from the third world, from the first world, must be shared with the third world because they want what we have. And they'll cut down the last rainforest and kill the last fish if they need to feed their people. So it's up to us in the first world to help bring the third world along, or they're going to collapse the planet just trying to have the kind of life that we have here in the first world. We must replace coal-burning power plants. Those are a major problem both in climate change and in the acidification of the atmosphere. That's acid rain, and the acid rain falls into the ocean, changes the pH of the ocean, and is destroying the oceans too.
Well, I'll tell you, Matt, we're going to take a short break, and with Matt Stein, we'll come back and when technology fails. Thank you. Hi, we're back from break with Matt Stein, and I tell you, Matt, this is some, I don't know, it's serious things that we're talking about.
Well, it is serious. This is a game changer where either we change the game or the life that our children have will be nothing compared to our life. And it could be anywhere from a Mad Max scenario where everything's falling apart to just a long, slow degradation. And I can't guarantee you which one it's going to be. But my personal preference is that we turn it around and we make a global renaissance. That's what I want to see as heaven on earth. I want to see an earth where we turn it around and we rejuvenate the earth and it becomes healthier and better every year. And it's doable. But it's not doable unless we make major changes. And we can do it. You know, we've got free will. We can do it.
Sounds good.
So number 9 of the 10 tips is global relocalization. It's buying local. And see, right now, the average item of food travels close to 2,000 miles. You know, in other words, your sauces or your fresh vegetables, all of those things that you eat every day, the average item travels close to 2,000 miles before it reaches your plate. In a world where energy is getting more and more expensive, it doesn't make sense to do that. And buying local does several things. When you buy local, you're not transporting stuff all over the world just to eat it, you know, cherries from Chile or wherever.
Well, I agree with people on one side of the lake, like Tahoe, are buying stuff they could be buying from the other side of the lake, and they're buying it from South Africa or South America.
That's right.
You just have to pay attention to your environment and, you know, make sure you're buying and selling what you can buy and sell locally.
The other thing that happens is called the local multiplier effect. So when I spend $10 locally, then the store owner gets profit from that, and he pays the people who work there. And if it's produced locally, then the farmer gets some of that $10, and then he goes out and he buys food at the restaurant and at the store. So the local multiplier effect says that when you buy something made or manufactured or grown locally, it keeps the money going round and round and round. So that $1 you spend locally might be $20 before it's gone. Whereas when you buy something from China, or you buy something from India or Chile, then those dollars go, they're out. And the same's true of oil. When you buy oil now, 60% of it comes from somewhere outside of America, and most of those people don't really like Americans, and you're helping to fund them in their fight against us. So when you buy locally, local energy, local food, local anything, that money keeps circulating around your community. Now, number 10 is probably the most important one. And that's making all decisions based on sustainability. See, it's a mindset. It says that when every decision is evaluated, like do we do this railroad? Do we buy something from China and India, or do we buy it local? Is it more sustainable? Is it getting me towards the goal of a sustainable planet, or is it getting further away from that goal of the sustainable planet? So all business decisions must be made based on sustainability. And unfortunately, there has to be some legislation in it. Because without legislation, the profit motive is just going to say, I'd like to, but I'm responsible to my shareholders and I must maximize my profit. So I'm sorry about the planet, but it's my goal as a CEO of a corporation to make the most money. So that means I got to buy my stuff from that part of the world where there's slave wages and no consideration for the environment. Because if I don't do that, then my profit margin goes down and I'm not doing the right thing for my shareholders. So making decisions based on sustainability is critical. It involves a mindset for each and every human being, but it also involves forcing our governments to make legislation to go in that direction.
Well, it's a total commitment too, because I was in purchasing for a lot of years, and I bought basically in a supermarket anything that you wouldn't buy as a customer. I didn't buy any produce or anything, but I bought the shelves and things like that. And a lot of the foreign companies were undercutting us on everything I bought. And everything I bought was a little bit higher buying American, and I would buy American only because somewhere it's going to affect somebody.
Right.
And that could be my shoppers.
That's correct.
Or my employees, or we'd have to cut employees because we're not getting the volume. It's a hard way to think, and I got in a lot of trouble until I backed this up many, many years ago, saying this is what we should have a company policy and use it to buy an American for patriotic or whatever, but just common sense.
Well, Ross Perot years ago, the independent candidate for President of the United States, and he said NAFTA is going to take this great country down. And I have to admit, from my opinion, that he's right. That shipping all the jobs offshore initially made a lot of profit for a lot of people, but we're seeing the fallback now. We're seeing the death of the middle class in America. People losing their houses right and left. How can you go from earning $25 at a union job to earning $7 an hour minimum wage at McDonald's or something? You know, what kind of lifestyle can you support on that? Nothing. And so it's going round and round and round, and we're seeing the result. But similarly, you know, that same kind of philosophy in the planet, that short-term, you know, profit motive, saying we're going to do what's best for the bottom line in the short term, that's the same thing that caused NAFTA, that's taking down the middle class. It's also taking down the planet. And let's talk about tragedy of the commons some. So, tragedy of the commons says that this is a guy, Mr. Hardin, who gave a great speech on that about 30, 40 years ago. And the commons is, imagine now you've got a small village, and there's common ground, there's grazing area, like it's not like private property and everybody owns everything. There's a village. So the village owns the trees, the village owns the water, the village, you know, it's for the common good of everybody. Now if I'm a herdsman, say I make my living in this village by raising goats, okay? Now, as the village is small and there's lots of land for everybody, it's no big deal. Everybody grows as many goats as they want. But as things get bigger and the population grows over generations and it gets more crowded, now all of a sudden the goats are eating everything in sight. The problem is that me as an individual, it's better for my family if I grow another goat, because that's more profit in my pocket. It's more meat for my family, more goat milk for my family, and goat cheese and all of those things. But if everybody in the village does that, then the herd areas are overgrazed and they collapse, and everyone starves and everyone suffers. So that's the tragedy of the commons. So when you think of commons, think that means like forests. Okay, cutting down the forest when there's tons of forests, logging unregulated logging is fine. But as it gets to a point where it grows, you start cutting them all down and they're gone. Now think of the Easter Island. In Easter Island, it was this beautiful paradise in the South Pacific, far away from other islands. And it was filled with giant trees and tons of animals and all of this. Well, over generations, the island, it was such a great place. There was more and more people living there, and it was a wonderful place to live. They cut down the last tree. They could no longer make boats to fish the oceans in. So when the anthropologists study like the debris, they found at first that they had all these sharks and bones, and that they were eating dolphins and sharks and big fish, and then the littler fish, and then finally they found they were eating rats and they were eating human beings, because everything collapsed, because they didn't preserve the commons. And so the tragedy of the commons says that everyone kind of says, you know, hey, if somebody else doesn't get it, I better get it before they get it. And that's what's happening in the world right now. And if we don't collectively change that, the tragedy of the commons will strike the whole planet, because it's all interconnected. It's a global market. So right now we're pulling from all different parts of the world to support our lifestyle here in America. And when we reach the point where we can't pull from everywhere anymore and it collapses all around us, that's not a pretty sight.
It's a lot of things to think about, but as one little person, buy local, that's common sense.
Buying local is a way of doing your part to help recycle. Now, in recycling, there's actually sort of a food chain. There's reduce, reuse, and recycle. So recycling, everyone kind of got that makes sense. But when you reduce your consumption, you save a lot more than when you recycle something. And when you reuse something, you save a lot more than when you recycle. So to give you an idea, if I take a simple personal computer, laptop or personal computer, there's 1.8 tons of debris from the manufacturing process. In other words, from taking raw materials and making all those components and the packaging and everything it takes to make a PC, you actually have a pile of 1.8 tons of thrown away debris in making that. So when you take that PC and throw out the PC, you're actually throwing out 1.8 tons of garbage along with the PC that went into making that. When you take that PC and you refurbish it and upgrade it, then you're saving that 1.8 tons of debris that went into making the PC rather than buying a new PC. So when you reduce your consumption, you're reducing not just the consumption of that little plastic bag or that whatever it is that you're going to buy, and the article of clothing, you're reducing the consumption of all of the fertilizers that went into growing the cotton, that went into manufacturing that shirt, and the chemicals that went into the dyes, all of those things. So In the food chain of things of saving the planet, it's reducing is the top thing, reusing, in other words, refurbishing, reusing, buying used, whatever, and recycling is the last in the food chain. But all of them are good, but think about it. Reduce is best, reuse is next, and recycle is last. It's still better than throwing away.
Well, we still have a little bit over a minute. Is there anything you want to leave our audience with?
Well, I'd say that you want to do your best. You want to finish the day knowing that you have done something in some little way to help make the planet better. You want to realize that the problems won't be solved by any individual one of us, but collectively we can make the change. Collectively we can make this shift happen. When slavery was an evil of the world, and millions of people around the world decided it was an evil that must be defeated, and they finally put someone into government, President Lincoln, to do something about it. So each individually, no person could solve it, but collectively we made that shift happen. When Hitler was threatening the world, he couldn't have been stopped if it was number 10 on the world's priority list. It had to be number 1 on the world's priority list. And saving the planet is like that. If we're going to do it, it's got to be a top priority. We can't leave it as like, well, we'll get around to it someday. It ain't going to happen. So what you need to do is every day do your best both to awaken yourself, awaken your friends, and to feel that you've made some little contribution towards this planet going in the right direction instead of the wrong direction.
Well, Matt, we have to go, and I'm going to have you back again. But in the meantime, get Matt Stein's book, When Technology Fails, and we'll put your website on the end of the show. Thank you, Matt, for being on the show.
Much pleasure.
Okay.
My pleasure.
It's been Michael Smith for Nevada Trails. Thank you.